All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Mindset Monday. It's great to be with you today. So over the last few Mondays, we've been focusing in this little mini-series, which we are calling Embracing Emotional Strength. It actually pairs with a challenge in a course that you may be participating in, or you can find in our platform. Again, Embracing Emotional Strength. So today, as we wrap up this, it's part 3 of a 3-part series. Just want a quick walk through where we've been so far. So in part 1, we focused on our inner world, which was the idea of like self-awareness, honesty, self-management, or what's sometimes called self-regulation. In part 2 of this, we talked more about the outward, the relational connections, and the way that emotional strength it transforms our relationships, like through clarity, through boundary setting, through truth telling with other people. So today we're going to build on all of that, and we're going to talk about how emotional strength becomes a way of life, like where it's actually practical and tangible in everyday experiences with alignment, consistency, and with steady self-leadership. All right, so I remember working with a client once. It wasn't all that long ago. I remember this is a client who they're like a consummate professional at work. They're very organized. They present themselves very well. They seem to be like put together. I remember them sitting in a session, and I remember them communicating to me this statement. They said, like, oftentimes I feel like two different people. And so I kind of lean in with curiosity, and they said, like, I'm steady, like when I'm calm. But the second life gets stressful, I become someone else. Okay, so what's not happening here, this is not like multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. This is not some phenomenon like we might think about, like the Incredible Hulk, where they literally transform into some other beast or some other being. No. What's happening with this individual is they're just having this polarized, this binary experience that happens between, hey, when I'm calm, when I'm cool, and I'm collected, I feel like one version of me. But as soon as life gets crazy, chaotic, and stressful, I become someone else. So I'll also talk about what's not happening here. It's not that it's just out of a sign of weakness. But in the way that we're talking about this in today, embracing emotional strength, it's actually more about them feeling disconnected in their experiences. They're reacting to life rather than responding with intention. Now, this client that I'm mentioning, this could be you, this could be me. In fact, I know there's been many times in my life where this has been me, right? Where I've been reactive rather than responsive. And I'm certain that's been the case for you as well, right? Just like this client, when you're calm, you're like one version of yourself. But as soon as things start to get a little chaotic, you start to experience yourself differently. So this is where emotional strength starts to make a significant difference in our lives. It's our ability to be able to be in those moments when life gets chaotic and life gets crazy, and our ability to respond rather than react, our ability to stay and maintain control rather than lose control. So it's really around this idea of, rather than being driven by our circumstances, our situations, whatever is going on around us, and being guided by our values, by what's inside of us. So I want to talk for a moment about alignment. Alignment is strength. So emotional strength isn't just about how you feel. Like, I know that we've been talking over these last few weeks about this idea of that emotional is connected to our feelings, and it absolutely is, but it's more than that. Emotional strength is not just how we feel, it's equally as much about how we live. It's not just how we experience those emotions, but it's how we respond to and what we do with those emotions. It means that our emotions, our thoughts, our words, and our actions all line up. That's what alignment means. Okay? Our ability to be emotionally strong is moving us towards this, again, alignment when our emotions, our thoughts, our words, our feelings, and our actions. So let me give you a couple examples. So when you're aligned, you respond rather than react. I already shared that one. When you're aligned, you choose instead of chase. Like, you have the fortitude, you have the resolve to be able to pause in a moment, to reflectfully choose, again, rather than chaotically chase. And then this one, when you're aligned, you lead yourself rather than lose yourself. It's back to this idea of rather than what's happening around us circumstantially, whatever the context is, we can lead ourselves because we're coming from a place of alignment. We're coming from a place that where our values are guiding us, and through that guidance we are able to lead, right? Rather than, so leading yourself rather than losing yourself. So here's a question in the midst of that you can ask yourself. Ask yourself this: am I living in a way that matches what I say I value? Am I living in a way that matches what I say I value? So I want to share a couple insights about that. So first of all, if we think about cognitive behavioral therapy, which is CBT, it actually has this language. It's called the thought-action alignment. And all that is it's simply being able to say our thoughts line up with our actions. So choosing actions that match our core beliefs. Okay, there's other frameworks that have other language, but essentially they're the exact same principle. There's what's called the value-action alignment. There's what's called cognitive dissonance. Let me talk about that for a second. Cognitive dissonance actually is a term that represents the space or the gap between what we believe and how we behave. Here's what we know just in our humanity is we find it more comfortable when there's alignment. We find it less comfortable when there's misalignment. So this term called cognitive dissonance, this dissonance is what's representing this push and pull experience between what we believe and how we behave. Okay, there's lots of examples of this. I might believe that I should eat healthy and get exercise, but my behavior is I missed my workout for today. I got busy. I didn't have time to meal prep, and so I hit the drive-thru. Right, that's my behavior. And then what happens, shows up in us, is this dissonance, this misalignment, right? Like, I hold this belief, like I'm a person, right, who makes healthy choices, and yet my behavior is, well, that wasn't true. That's not the way that it played out today. And so again, it creates this internal tension within us. When I talked about the phrase the value action gap, that term is actually used in a lot of environmentalists and in the industry of environmental work. So think about it this way: like, I believe that we should take care of the earth that God has entrusted us to. But my behavior is I'm too lazy to put the recycling in the recycling bin. That might be an example. And so somewhere in the midst of that, right, even just when I say I'm too lazy, like there's self-judgment and criticism, or there's some kind of guilt that shows up. Like, I know my belief is I should be taking care of the planet, but my behavior tells me something different. So here's why this idea of comfort and discomfort is we are constantly looking for alignment. Let me go back to this idea of cognitive dissonance. So if we just kind of maybe this hand represents this my belief, this represents my other hand my behavior. So here's what we want to ultimately do is we want to see them aligned. Like, my belief and my behavior, they match up. But when there's dissonance between them, what we tend to do, I think at our core, what we hope to do is we hope to hold on to our beliefs, our values, our morals, and move our behaviors in place so it's alignment. Okay. I think that's the hope. That's the work that we want to do. But I think in the midst of that, what we have to do is we have to really do the hard work of kind of questioning and assessing and determining what are our core beliefs, what are our values, what's the moral compass that guides us in life. And for many of us, we haven't actually done that work, so we haven't really solidified those deeper values, morals, and core beliefs. So it's easier for that to be flexible and fluid for us, in which case many of us just like the behaviors that we have, or we like the outcomes of those behaviors. There's lots of things in our lives that we do out of convenience, we do out of comfort, we do because in the moment it feels good. And so what happens is we tend to actually move the construct of our beliefs to shift. So if this is our behaviors, we end up actually doing this. We move our beliefs to more align with our behaviors. So, and it's subtle too. We rationalize, we justify, we say it's no big deal, it's not hurting anyone, it's not that bad, everybody's doing it. We come up with all sorts of explanations. So why do I say that? Because that's what helps us make this shift to a way that we feel more safe and more comfortable about moving our behaviors to align with our beliefs rather than moving our beliefs to align with our behaviors. Okay, so let's go back to this idea of alignment. So I talked about CBT. In DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, it teaches us that emotional regulation is built on constant, intentional actions. So DBT says, do the small work, like take the small steps, make the steady choices. So rather than these big, occasional, like breakthroughs, like we often maybe push towards. No, DBT says, hey, keep it simple and do it consistently. So here's a couple examples of this from DBT. So small, steady choices built on the habit of strength. So here's how we might apply this in the way of emotional strength. So this idea, the ability to just simply pause before reacting. Okay, if we could just find ourselves in a place, a small, simple, but significant step of pause before reacting. I won't get into all the reasons why this is so important, but we've talked about them. If you've watched any of our videos, our live streams, been in our challenges, and it's simply this idea. If we can pause, if we can just pause in a moment, if we can take a deep breath, what we're actually doing is we're allowing our body and our mind to reconnect in a different way from whatever reactivity we got going on, right? Our feelings that are showing up on us emotionally and physically, and then the bursting out in something reactive. It's allowing us to slow down. DBT talks about wise mind, right? It's allowing us to re-engage the frontal cortex part of our brain, and it's being able to help us think more logically, practically, make better decisions, do problem solving. So we can literally pause, take a deep breath. It's going to help us respond rather than react. Or this one, small, steady choices, the habit, the build of strength is choosing how you want to show up. Man, that's so important. That's another key principle from DBT. It reminds us that we actually get to decide. We get to decide how we take actions. Like we actually, CBT, when it talks about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, that sequence, it reminds us that behaviors are our choice. Based on our thoughts, based on our feelings, we get to choose, again, this idea of how we're going to show up. And then how about this one? Small, steady choices built on the habit of strength, practicing kindness in your self-talk, even when it's hard. So we talked about this over the last 2 weeks, but when we can slow down, when we can practice kindness and compassion towards ourselves, even in the hard, stressful, challenging moments. It's part of what we think about in emotional regulation. It comes from the idea of what's called distress tolerance, our ability to stay present in the difficult moment longer. Okay, let me give you a couple examples of that. So think about this when you're frustrated. So when you're frustrated, but instead of snapping, you pause and ask a question like this. What's actually bothering me, or what's actually going on inside of me? So then following it up with what do I think would actually help me right here, right now? Or how about this? Like you're feeling overwhelmed, but instead of shutting down, you might say something to yourself, ask this question like, this is a lot. I can take a break and come back later. Right? That like affirming statement. This is a lot. It's validating. And I can take a break and come back later. Right? Allowing yourself to respond rather than react. Or how about this one? These aren't just emotional skills. They're leadership skills. What if we could start to embrace this idea that emotional strength is actually an important part of our self-leadership? And so all the things that we've talked about so far today, the things we talked about last Monday, the things we talked about the Monday before that, all the things in the course and the challenge around emotional strength really tie to this idea of self-leadership. So when we can increase emotional strength, we can actually increase our ability to lead ourselves. Okay, so that brings me to talk about this idea of like, what if we could like live and we could lead from the inside out? So real strength isn't about avoiding the pain. Real strength is being able to show up in the midst of it. Like we've talked about this over the last couple of weeks. Real strength requires us to be open and honest. Real strength often requires us to slow down, pause, and take a moment, because it's in real strength that we are able to stay present. We are able to respond rather than react. So ask yourself these questions. So what do I want to stand for? How do I want to treat others even when I'm stressed? What does leadership look like when no one's watching? Man, those are important questions, and those are important questions not just for us to live out right here in the moment, but they're important questions for us to live by. Like these are kind of fundamental. These are like grounding questions for us. So I want to give you a couple questions that might help you to do this work. So the first is ask the question, what am I feeling right now? This is a self-check-in question we've talked about before. If you don't have a copy of the feeling wheel, you can literally just Google it. You can find it. You'll find this wheel with all sorts of feelings on it, and I think that's really helpful. It's a tool because it helps us put a name to what our experience is. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to check in with yourself. What am I feeling right now? The second question, as it relates to today's conversation about self-leadership, is this. What do I value in this situation? We've talked about in the past, DBT connects to asking this question about our emotions, which is, what is this emotion trying to tell me? So if we pair that with today's conversation about self-leadership and about value, I think that's a really interesting question. What do I value in this situation? So whatever's going on in me, around me, whatever's happening, whatever's the context of the situation, there's an emotion. What emotion is showing up, right? So that's what I'm asking myself. What am I feeling right now? The second question, what do I value in this situation? This is simply this idea of what are my emotions trying to tell me? And then this third question, what's one action that aligns with both? That's interesting. What does it mean by both? It aligns with the emotion that I have right now and the value that I'm holding. What if I could honor myself to be able to say, what's one action I could take right now that validates my emotion, right? Whatever's going on inside of me, and puts value to my belief system. What's one choice I can make? By simply asking that question, it reminds us that we get to be in control. We get to be in charge. We get to respond rather than react. Okay, so I want to talk about this idea of building emotional consistency. Emotional strength, as I talked about earlier with DBT, right? This taking the small practical steps, it requires consistency. So I once worked with this client. It was a leader in his organization. He was pretty high up in this particular work group, and I remember him saying something to me like, "Hey, I can be cool, calm, and collected with everyone else, and I can help them manage their chaos and their crazy. But he said this. He said, I feel like I'm constantly in crisis mode. Isn't that interesting? He led this team, right? Felt like he could help manage whatever was going on with all of them, right? Help them work through their chaos, their crazy. But he said there's something else going on inside of him. He felt like he was just constantly in crisis mode. So, and then I remember him telling me, he's like, I can hold it together at work, but then I fall apart when I get home. Interesting, isn't it? And I think he's not alone in this experience. Right back to that first client I talked about, where I feel like I'm two different people. When it's calm, I can be one person, and as soon as life gets stressful, I feel like I'm another person. Okay, here's another kind of iteration of that. This client who says, like, hey, I can hold it together at work, but then I fall apart when I get home. Or I can help everybody else with their crazy and their chaos, but I feel like I'm constantly in crisis mode. So I remember working with this client, and we were able to actually put practical steps in place to this idea of what if we could just have small, regular, consistent steps to do this kind of work in emotional strength. So here's what he did. He started out with routine, everyday, emotional check-ins. He would check in with himself, and then later in the day, he would check in. Actually, in his case, he was checking in with his spouse. Every day, he was doing something else. He had learned to pause before he reacted. Every time there was a situation, rather than just reacting, he made a commitment. He was able to follow through. He's going to hit the pause button, take a deep breath, run through that quick sequence of what was the situation, what are my thoughts, what are my feelings, how do I want to respond to that feeling. And then he did this one other thing that was so important. He made it a habit to start speaking to himself with kindness and compassion. Right? Whenever situations happened, and he would initially interpret them in a way that was self-critical, judgmental, he was choosing to go with compassion and kindness. So over time he did this work. There was steadiness, there was compassion, and there was grace, there was patience. He was able to slow down, and he was able to respond rather than react. And I remember with this client, after he's had some success and kind of some wins in this area, and he started to see the shift in his life. I remember him coming into session one day and saying, hey, I think I'm going to try this with my team. And you know what? He did. He was able to go back with his team and said, hey, team, here's some things I want us to do. I want us to check in with each other every day. So everybody had this routine that was built into their culture. We're going to do regular check-ins. The second thing they were going to do is they were making a mutual commitment to pause before they would react. So even when they would sit in team meetings and something would show up or come up, they actually made it part of their culture. Like, pause, right? Consider, what am I thinking, feeling? How do I want to respond? And then this third one, again, when we talked about speaking to yourself with kindness and compassion, they were able to not only do that internally, but they were committed as a group to be able to do that with one another. When a situation happened, when some incident came up, their first response was going to be to one another with compassion and kindness. And over time, this transformed not only this leader, but it transformed the team in the way that they were able to respond in ways that were calm and regulated and in control, rather than in crisis and chaos. Okay, so just before we wrap up, I think it's important for us to consider this, that it's not about ignoring our feelings. We've talked about this before. That's not what real emotional strength is, but the ability to be open and honest and real with ourselves. It's about staying steady and clear. Like last week we talked about the boundaries, right? Clear with ourselves, clear with others, even when things get hard. And it often shows up quietly. I think that's one of the things I love about emotional strength. It doesn't boast, it doesn't brag, right? It doesn't make a big to-do. Emotional strength shows up quietly, and it shows up consistently. So here's one of the ways that we know that we're growing in emotional strength as it relates to living it out is it shows up at work, at home, with ourselves, when we're with other people. All right, so let me just share a few things as we wrap up for today. So this series has really been about building emotional strength that lasts, right? Now, so yes, we've talked about being emotionally strong in a moment, but it's really about building strength that is consistent, strength that lasts over time. So remember in part 1, we talked about this, focusing on our inner world, right? Awareness, honesty, self-regulation. Part 2, we explored strength and transforming in our relationships with clarity, boundaries, truth-telling, right? Today we closed this off. We talked about this idea of like emotional strengths, becoming aware of the way that we live, the way that our actions play out every day through alignment, consistency, and steadiness. So here's a few things I want you to practice this week. I want you to go back to these questions I talked about. So you ask these questions, what am I feeling? Ask the questions, what do I value? And then ask the question, what's one action that aligns with both? Again, to validate my feeling and to align with my value. And as I noted at the very beginning of this, if you're coming to the end of this 3-week mini series from our live event on Mondays, and you haven't had a chance yet to go through our 14-day challenge, I would strongly encourage you to do that. It's actually titled the same thing, Embracing Emotional Strength. You'll find it in our app. You'll find it on our website. That is a great next step for you, is take that 14-day challenge. All right, everyone, it's great to be with you today.